thank you, Congressman Lee and Congressman Rush, and all of our guests. I'm Congressman Steve Cohen from Memphis, and I chair the subcommittee on civil liberties, civil rights, and the Constitution of the Judiciary Committee. Under that auspices, we're having this briefing, and I want to welcome you to this congressional forum on Cointelpro. Cointelpro, what happened and lessons for today. This afternoon, we will examine J. Edgar Hoover's counterintelligence programs. Counterintelligence program is more or less an acronym for Cointelpro, or Telpro. Their continued impact today and what policy changes may still be needed to ensure effective law enforcement and prohibit the abuses that we suffered from. I've been interested in this issue for many decades, but I've become much more acquainted with it from a film that Michael Isikoff and David Korn did, and then more recently, The Black Messiah and Judas, which was a great film, and it brought home what happened with Fred Hampton. Co-hosted this forum with Congressman Bobby Rush and Congressman Barbara Lee, both of whom were involved directly in this in the issues that we're going to be discussing in the 60s. I want to thank both of them for the leadership on this issue and for a lifetime of commitment. And Congressman Hank Johnson, who I think will be joining us, and Congressman Deborah Ross, who with me are two of my colleagues from the Judiciary Committee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties. Let me thank all of our witnesses. Your sharing of your experiences and expertise is invaluable to Congress. This video will be made and put up on YouTube, so it'll be shared to many. I'd like to acknowledge my Lassiter, Jay Lassiter, Carolyn Huggins, and the daughter, grandson, and sisters, respectively, of John Huggins. We'll hear more about John Huggins in a few moments, and I also welcome Rasa Mott, Yada Heiler, Lisbeth Telson, and other family members of Ericka Huggins, all of whom will be joining us on Zoom. J. Edgar Hoover created Cointelpro to, quote, disrupt, unquote, and to neutralize, unquote, what he deemed domestic threats. Cointelpro consisted of 5 programs: the Communist Party program, the Socialist Workers Party program, the White Hate Group program, the Black Nationalist Hate Group program, and the New Left program. The Black Nationalist Hate Group program and the New Left program were two that were chosen by Hoover with a lack of discretion and understanding, I believe. The actual targets and victims of the Cointelpro extended much further than the names of these 5 programs would suggest, and included Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and John Kerry. In truth, the Cointelpro was used to harass, manipulate, imprison, and harm and kill the leaders and activists of politically disfavored groups and movements as J. Edgar Hoover chose. The anti-war movement, the women's liberation movement, and the environmental movement were all targeted. The brunt of the program and some of its most outrageous abuses was reserved for people of color, particularly Black Americans. The Black Panther Party and its members were literally in the FBI's crosshairs. The recent Academy Award-winning film Judas and the Black Messiah retells the murder of Fred Hampton, the leader of the Illinois Black Panther Party, an amazing individual who made himself a legend in his brief 22 years. We're grateful that his former partner and son are here today to share with us. Cointelpro was not just violent and illegal. What made it so pernicious is it undermined the Constitution and undermined democracy. The United States was born of dissent, and alternative perspectives should be welcomed, not neutralized. Protests should be encouraged. We may disagree, but every American has a right and freedom to speak their mind, to petition their government, to protest, to be engaged and active in civic life, and contribute their energy and efforts to pursue a more perfect union. The FBI attempted to snuff out minorities and minority viewpoints. Cointelpro was government-sponsored harassment and violence, not law enforcement. The FBI then exported these tactics to police departments across the country. Cointelpro as such may no longer exist, but its impact is still here, and it's been felt in America. There are people still in prison who are targets of the program. The tremendous distrust sowed between communities, particularly communities of color, and law enforcement still is deep and harmful. We must reckon with these past abuses and understand their contemporary consequences. We all know what medical experiments at Tuskegee did to affect African Americans and their concern about the vaccinations that we have today. Well, the abuse of the law enforcement with the Black Panthers in the 60s still affects people today. These harms continue on until they are rectified. Marvin Gaye tells us about it every day. We must reckon with these abuses and understand these contemporary consequences. Following the revelation of these programs, Congress examined these programs, most notably with the Church Committee, and policy changes were enacted. That doesn't mean all the problems were fixed. By far, they weren't. We must reform our law enforcement practices and how we address real domestic threats. We must rebuild our criminal justice system so it's genuinely focused on justice and not, as Michelle Alexander aptly and famously characterized, the new Jim Crow. The first step is honesty with our history. Congressman Rush recently introduced a bill to release all the Cointelpro records. For years, I've led a bill to strip J. Edgar Hoover's name from the FBI headquarters in Washington. We should not provide him such an honor. I look forward to hearing our witnesses' recommendations about other steps Congress should take. And I thank the members of Congress here today and our witnesses. And I'd first like to recognize Congressman Bobby Rush for our opening statement.
Well, thank you, Steve and Congressman Cohen. I'm delighted to be on this forum with all the individuals who are here. I'm glad to see Akua, Fred Jr., Ericka, Chairman Bobby, and my colleague in the Congress, Marvin Lee. As you know, Steve, the Cointelpro program was a criminal counterintelligence program that targeted African-American citizens, particularly Black political activists, during the 60s, 50s, 60s, and the 70s. The dark legacy of the Cointelpro program remains a stain on our nation. Government officials, including and led by the odious J. Edgar Hoover, utilized the full army of and federal budget to target, harass, and even murder American citizens who were fulfilling and carrying out their constitutional right to protest injustices conducted by the American government. I might add that these individuals who were targeted by the FBI and other governmental agencies were no threat to the safety and security of this nation. They were protesting under their constitutional authorities and rights as American citizens. It is incumbent upon those of us who are in positions of power to get to the truth about this program to the American people. And this is vital to the future of civil rights in our nation, even as we speak. I reflect upon in Chicago. I think that there were more outrage by the Chicago Police Department and the political establishment here in Chicago, and probably indeed throughout the nation, to the fact that Black Panther, members of the Black Panther Party, were feeding hungry children breakfast before they went to school, testing for sickle cell anemia, among Black students organizing free health clinics, organizing free busing to prison program. These programs inflame the FBI more than any other aspect of our of the program of the Black Panther Party, because they showed a real contradiction between what humane policy should be and what they expose the inhumaneness of the federal government and the police agency across the nation. Let me just say that in my absolute opinion, in all my research, I have come to one fact, that the assassination of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark and the wounding of the 7 other passengers in the apartment, but particularly the assassination of Fred Hampton, was the only state-sanctioned assassination of any American citizen, paid for, carried out, implemented, and conducted by the American government, the only one in the history of this nation. Abraham Lincoln's assassination was not a state-sanctioned assassination. The assassination of both Kennedys were not state-sanctioned assassination. And the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King was not a state-sanctioned assassination. Only the assassination of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, particularly Fred Hampton, was a state-sanctioned assassination, where the records will show that the Roy Mitchell, the FBI agent, who was O'Neill's handler, he was given a reward, an award rather, a reward. He was given a bonus. O'Neill himself was paid a bonus for his activities surrounding the assassination of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. And this reward came from the American taxpayer. So that's getting to the truth of the breadth and the depth of the Cointelpro program was the reason why I introduced the Cointelpro Full Disclosure Act, which will require the federal government agencies to publicly release all counterintelligence files, unless there is a specific, compelling national interest reason for those files to stay classified. Like your bill, my bill will also remove the odious name of J. Edgar Hoover from the FBI building in Washington, because J. Edgar Hoover was the #1 assailant on the Americans' constitutional guarantees for its citizens, rather. His name should be removed from that building, and his name should go down as one of the premier architects of the assassination of innocent citizens and the harassment and vilification of countless American citizens, young people who were fighting for their constitutional rights in order to make America a better nation. We must pull back the curtain on the FBI's racially and politically motivated espionage on its own citizens. And this is long overdue, and we need answers, right now, right away. I also was a victim of Cointelpro, and I recall many incidents where the FBI attempted to create friction and animosity and inflame violence between members of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party and street organizations, the Black Stone Rangers and the Vice Lords and the Black Disciples. So there was no tactic, no strategy, no lie, no effort that was beneath the Cointelpro program that they would not use without even a second thought to create havoc among members of the Black Panther Party and to create unimaginable harm to the members of the Black Panther Party. And it's for that reason that this exposure is late in coming, but it must come. We can't wait any longer for it to come. And so with that, Steve, I'm gonna yield back my time to you and to Barbara Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. I thank you for your time. I thank you for the time you spent to make America a better place, both inside and outside of government.
Right.
And now I'd like to recognize a lady who has been equally as aggressive and determined in trying to make America a better union, the Honorable Barbara Lee.
Thank you, Chairman Cohen, very much for that introduction, but also thank you for your tremendous leadership and your boldness in putting together this forum today, this briefing forum. And I just want to share a couple of things. First question I asked, first issue I raised when I first came to Congress in 1998 was with John Conyers, our beloved Chairman John Conyers of the Judiciary Committee. I said, we have got to have a hearing on Cointelpro. And John Conyers tried every which way, Chairman Cohen, to do this. And he was stopped at every step of the way. Now here we are in 2021, finally just getting our first meeting and first briefing on this. So I just have to salute you and thank you and Representative Bobby Rush and all of those who helped put this together. Want to especially salute our witnesses today because they have paid the supreme price in terms of their families, in terms of the sacrifices that they made, and in terms of still highlighting and reminding us of what could be, what is to come, and using their life experiences and their sacrifices to continue to fight for justice in this country. Today's forum, let me just, with regard to Cointelpro, I want to mention a couple of things because I vividly remember the days of Cointelpro under J. Edgar Hoover, and I'm in full support and co-sponsors of both of your bills, Chairman Cohen and Representative Rush. So important. I ended up being in the middle of this aggressive surveillance and counterintelligence activities after becoming involved with the Black Panther Party as a community worker, mind you. I was not a member, I was a community worker. I was a student, the Black Student Union president at Mills College. And I used my organizational and fundraising skills to work in the survival programs. I bagged groceries, I gave out shoes, I helped Ericka, Ms. Huggins, develop the Community Learning Center, the Black Panther School. I actually was so proud to be Mr. Seale's fundraising coordinator when he ran for mayor of Oakland. I could go on and on and on about my involvement, but I thought that the 10-point program embodied, and it still embodies, many of the progressive goals that we're all still fighting to achieve today, including equity and health and education, criminal justice reform, ending police brutality, eliminating food and housing insecurity for the Black community. I mean, I bagged groceries with the Black Panther Party and gave out chickens and food and Cheerios and all fruit and vegetables. And we had thousands of people at those survival rallies, okay? So these activities to empower the Black community through these programs that provided for survival needs, first of all, we shouldn't have had to do that in the America, the richest and most powerful country in the world. But these were viewed by J. Edgar Hoover as a threat to our national security. And so the political and social organizing done by groups like the Black Panther Party, specifically the Black Panther Party, were unfairly targeted, and they set us up. They set the party up for the brutal attacks and murders that took place during that time. Now, and I remember that very clearly. Let me say a couple of things. Along with the several witnesses, you know, I know who are with us today, I know how Cointelpro ruined the lives of innocent people. I myself, as a community worker, had my privacy invaded. I think Ms. Huggins and Mr. Seale remember some of the stuff that was going on as it relates to me. Couldn't figure out what in the world was this about. Later, when I finally got my file, I want you to know, yay thick, so much was redacted in my file, but clearly now I know what was going on once I got my file. In terms of, and I got this file under the Freedom of Information Act. The Cointelpro surveillance, it demonstrated just in my file, the scope and the scale of this intrusion. It's scary when I even read it now, to know what took place just as a community worker who was trying to help the community, working with the Black Panther Party and its programs and its leadership and our grassroots organizations and our members of the party. And so it was a very scary time, but I personally wouldn't back down. I mean, I kept going, as you know, and I'm still going. And I think the truth has got to come out about Cointelpro, because let me tell you, Chairman Cohen, a couple of years ago, and okay, I want to read this to you. The FBI issued an intelligence assessment, and you know the program, the Black Identity Extremist Program. They say that's motivated to target law enforcement officers, which is a new domestic terror threat. So they said that Black identity extremists, Black people, in other words, who were protesting police misconduct, police murders, were considered now a new threat, and they set up a special unit in the FBI. I called it Cointelpro 2. According to the FBI, and I'm quoting, Black identity extremists' perceptions of police brutality against African Americans has been responsible for an increase in premeditated retaliatory lethal violence against law enforcement, and will very likely serve as a justification for such violence in the future. Now, this was in 2017, the FBI's new program. Black identity extremism does not exist, as you know. It is simply not real. But this was another way for the FBI to surveil the Black community. So we must be vigilant now. This briefing is so important because we all have to understand what a Cointelpro 2 looks like now. And so the briefing we're having today will inform us and will give us the direction that we need so that we can move forward with our legislation, our funding priorities, and make sure that we stop this Cointelpro 2 dead in its tracks. Because again, as a community worker, as someone who worked with the Black Panther Party and one who was a victim of Cointelpro, I understand very clearly why this must be stopped. And again, I want to just say to the family members of those who were killed, and to Chairman Hampton and the states, yes, it was state-sponsored murder, as Representative Rush said, that your work and the work of the members of the Black Panther Party, those of you here today, are making sure that justice prevails in this country and that we stop these assaults on Black people and people of color who are just protesting and petitioning their government to be accountable and to provide for equality and justice for all. So thank you all again very much. And thank you, Mr. Cohen.
You're very welcome. Congressman Lee, I thank you for your nice remarks and your opening statement. Just curious, that program you said of Black individuals, extremists, that was the Attorney General Jeff Sessions at the time that started?
Yeah, the FBI.
What a surprise. What a surprise.
Yeah. And we need to, out of this, talk about following up, because they put it into another unit that's called something else now in terms of domestic surveillance. So we need to follow up and talk about what they've done since the Black Caucus met with them. And several of us followed up, and they did just some window dressing changes with this. So we need to talk about that.
Thank you. And I'd like to recognize Chairman Rush to introduce our next witness. He'll introduce the first two witnesses, then Congressman Lee will introduce the following two. So Congressman Bobby Rush, you're recognized to introduce the first witness.
Again, Steve, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. I want to thank you once again, Steve, for this opportunity. Let me introduce Ms. Akua Njeri. She is an American writer and activist and a former member of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. Since the age of 12, Ms. Njeri has remained indispensable to the social justice movement and to political activism. Her work began with protesting the substandard housing conditions in Chicago and continued with becoming a member of the Black Student Union. This is a matter of personal privilege. I recall vividly the time that Fred came back, returned to the office at 2350 West Madison, where we were all there, and how excited he was, because I think he had spoken at, I think it was Truman Junior College, and he was so excited about the fact that he had met then Akua, her name is Deborah, how excited he was. And he was so overwhelmed and excited about this lady who he had met there after that, and then speaking engagement at, I think it was Truman Junior College in Uptown, Chicago. Ms. Njeri later joined the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, where she supported many community programs. She worked at the Free Medical Clinic, the Free Breakfast for Children program, the busing program, and many other programs of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. She became the fiancée of Fred Hampton and the mother of Fred Hampton Jr. And Ms. Njeri survived the massacre on West Monroe on December 4, 1969. She was a target and a victim of the Cointelpro program. In that apartment on that morning, there was another guy by the name of Leonard Trulock in that room where Deborah and where Fred was killed. And the lawyer told us that Trulock himself said that he shouted out to the police, "Stop shooting, stop shooting. We have a pregnant woman in this room." And that woman was Akua Njeri. Akua, Ms. Njeri, I want to thank you for participating in today's forum, and we look forward to your testimony.
Thank you. I wonder, can you all hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, because I know you can't see me, so they've been trying to fix it, but it's okay. So thank you for allowing me this time with the panel. And greetings to everybody.
Good. And Steve, am I supposed to proceed in introducing Fred Jr.?
No, we're going to hear from Miss Njeri first, and then we'll introduce Fred Hampton Jr.
All right, okay.
And it's Mother's Day, so she should go first. Or was Mother's Day.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess basically what I'm talking about with the Cointelpro is how it brutally impacted on so many lives, on whole communities, really. And the assassination of Chairman Fred and Defense Captain Mark Clark stands out in history as one of the most brutal attacks on our movement, on our people, on our communities. We refer to it as our ground zero, like a lot of other people refer to other areas, but this is what really took the covers off of the U.S. government as an active participant in the assassination of public leaders. We talk about it being ground zero, not because that's the only one, but that was the one that took the covers off of the attacks on movements. And a lot of groups were under attack, and you didn't have to be Black Panther organization, but by the Cointelpro papers, 90% of the activity was directed at the Black Panther Party. And that says a lot. That's wiretapping, that's following people, that's bringing agent provocateurs into organizations, paid and unpaid. And it's also harassing family members to try to get them to snitch and inform on people that were in the party. It also, when people had jobs, they would go to their jobs to make sure they didn't work there anymore. And at the time our son was born 17 days later, after the brutal assassination of December 4th. And a number of people were wounded. I was not physically wounded, but a gun was pressed to my pregnant belly. And as I came out through a line of two lines of gunmen, one of the pigs grabbed my robe open and started laughing and say, "What do you know, you have abroad here?" But I was so pregnant, you could see my pregnant belly with the robe closed up. That pig grabbed me by the hair and slung me into the kitchen area. And then the shooting stopped, and a voice that was not an occupant of the apartment said, "He's barely alive. He'll barely make it." And I knew they were talking about Chairman Fred, but I couldn't see because I was in the kitchen facing the wall. And then the shooting started back again. And they said, again, a voice unfamiliar that wasn't an occupant said, "He's good and dead now." And I knew that they were talking about Chairman Fred. I want people to understand, as I came out of the rear bedroom, in Chairman Fred's robe and his long underwear and his house shoes, I had no blood on me. As I covered down on him, on top of him, the pigs were shooting, plaster was flying off the wall, and the mattress was vibrating from all the bullets going into it. And I had no blood on me, which to indicate Chairman Fred was not shot, murdered, assassinated while I was in the room. And we later demanded an independent autopsy in which it was discovered that a bunch of Secanol, which was given to him through red Kool-Aid that he kept in the refrigerator by one of the informants, I don't know which one, but they said it was enough Secanol to kill a horse. And that's why Chairman Fred had no movement. His only movement, the initial story by then State's Attorney Edward V. Hanrahan and many of the newspapers, was that Chairman Fred stood at the window of our bedroom quietly shooting a .45 gun. And anybody ever seen a .45, you're not gonna quietly shoot no .45 anyway. It's a very powerful piece. But Chairman Fred never got out of the bed. He never made any movement other than to lift his head in slow motion. I'm doing it now. I know y'all can't see me. And then lay it back down. And I thought it lay his head back down. And I knew it was strange because although he was a big guy, he moved really fast. But this movement was in extremely slow motion. And that was the only movement that he made. And as I was taken out, the pigs was arguing about whose prisoners we were going to be. As I was taken out of the kitchen going towards the front, I didn't look towards our bedroom because I didn't know how I would respond and to what I would see. But I did see Defense Captain Mark Clark as they took us out the front door, laying on the floor in a pool of blood, as he had been shot in the heart as he was sitting in a chair. And the reflex of his body falling and the gun going off went up into the ceiling of our apartment to the stairways of the second floor. That was the only shot that was supposed to attribute it to the Black Panther Party. And the nail heads that Hanrahan, then State's Attorney, got on and said were bullet heads were exposed. The door across from the room, the first bedroom, was exposed. Those were no bullet holes. And the what they call it, barricade that was up on the floor, separating the kitchen from the dining room, which we had converted to a bedroom, was not a barricade. It was really to keep the rats from running through the house.
That's a horrific situation that you recall and you experienced, and I appreciate your relating it to us so we'll have a better perspective of exactly what happened there on that awful day. If you'd like to add anything else, we're welcome to hear it, but otherwise we'll recognize your son. Would you be all right? Should we recognize your son at this point?
I would say real quickly, I met a lot of people through the years that say they were in an organization like the Panthers. There was no other organization like the Black Panther Party. It was unique and different. Not just a bunch of people running around doing good, but a group of people that were informed by a politic, by rules of discipline, by an organizational structure, organization that was founded by Chairman Bobby Seale and Minister Huey P. Newton. And it's important that people understand that everybody was not the same. And the party didn't require everybody to be a revolutionary, as had been testified to before. All type of people volunteered and supported. But because you wore a tam or a leather jacket didn't make you a Panther. You had to go through strict political education. And we had what we call rally Panthers that came dressed up. And Chairman Fred would say, oh, let them come. And the pigs don't know who a Panther or who's just at the rally. So they get confused in numbers. And we always said, people ask, how many Panthers are there? Those that know don't say, those that say don't even know.
Ms. Njeri, we appreciate your testimony. Representative Rush, would you like to introduce Mr. Hampton Jr.?
Certainly, it's my honor and privilege to introduce the son of Fred Hampton, my friend, Fred Hampton Jr., and the son of Akua Njeri. Fred Hampton Jr. is an actor, a spoken word artist, and a poet who continues the legacy and the spirit of his father, Fred Hampton Sr., through his work as the chairman of the Prisoners of Conscience Community and the Black Panther Party Club. He, as an unborn child, survived the brutal assassination and murder of his father, Fred Hampton Sr. And as I said before, the only state-sanctioned assassination of an American citizen on American soil was in the history of the United States. Fred, I want to thank you for participating in today's forum. And I want to commend you and congratulate you and your mother on your fight to protect the legacy of your father, Fred Hampton Sr. Some of your tactics were I didn't agree with, but you were steadfast in your resolve to make sure that your father's name was not exploited by anybody. And I want to commend and congratulate you and your mother for holding the creative artists and production team that produced the award-winning Black Messiah and the Black Judas, the Academy Award winning show. That show would have probably deviated, revised a lot of that history had you been present on the set each and every day that they produce. So it is not, it's my honor and my privilege to introduce Fred Hampton Jr. to this congressional forum.
Mr. Hampton Jr., you're recognized.
Right on. First, thank you, Congressman. Also, good afternoon, to congressmen, congresswomen, to panelists, I guess in this capacity as witnesses, and to the community at large. I don't, even with my introduction, I'll just, I guess in my bio, I would include that in many cases, from the eyes of the system, I've been viewed as a 3-strike offender. 1, for just simply being Black, being African. 2, for being the son of Chairman Fred Hampton, and also of Akua Njeri, formerly known as Deborah Johnson. And 3, for continuing to fight for liberation of our people. And I take a position that if any entity considers that a crime, so be it. We have a mantra. We say a legacy is more important than our life, because the reality is we have a certain amount of time to be here physically. But a legacy serves as a template or prototype of how you can deal with like situations. I said at the funeral service or repast, we had a community repast for Stanley Tookie Williams. And I said something to the effect that Tookie Williams grew up in the climate similar that I grew up in, which was deprived of organizations such as the Black Panther Party, where only options in life were given to people to become a Boy Scout or a banger. And so we attempted, we humbly attempted to walk not in the footsteps, but the Panther Paw steps of their organization. I will also want to say this also. December the 4th, 1969 was one of our September 11 stories. It was the day in which 2 of our quote unquote twin towers, quote unquote, fell, that being 21-year-old Chairman Fred and 22-year-old Defense Captain Mark Clark. And we put it in the context of terrorism. And also, as I'm the son, as I mentioned, I'm the son of Chairman Fred, and also Akua Njeri. And I feel fortunate to have fallen from the tree of 2 freedom fighters. But the dire duality of that is that we've inherited some consequences that come with the ongoing Cointelpro. The Cointelpro, the counterintelligence program, and which is articulated from former Director of FBI J. Edgar Hoover, architected by former Deputy Director of FBI William Sullivan. The state's own mouth said it was a program created to discredit, to demise, to disrupt, and destroy any Black nationalist movements, especially amongst the youth. And over 90% of it was directed to the Black Panther Party. Throughout time, it's been highs and lows in our struggle, but the Cointelpro has been consistent. And we are terrorized to the point that we are terrified to even acknowledge that we're terrorized. The Cointelpro remains to have a stain in our brain and a mark in our hearts, to the point that many of us are fearful to even acknowledge it. And I can think of countless occasions that our family and our colleagues have even attempted to bring this discussion up about opening the files up on Chairman Fred, Defense Captain Mark Clark, Black Panther Party, and which not only did it fall upon deaf ears by the media and elected officials, but we were met with an intensified Cointelpro, political imprisonment, assassination attempts, so on and so forth. With all that being said, we know that people become quote unquote conscious or come to grips with certain things through 1 of 3 ways: inspiration, aspiration, or desperation. And these are definitely desperate times. And so I think it's important that we, seize the time with this climate of having conversations, which many of us are forced to, a climate in which, we can't even keep up with the names that fall into the ranks with the George Floyds and Breonna Taylors. It's common, but the deal it's terrible, but it's fine. What's good about it is acknowledging it of that, because so many cases it's been we've been told to put it back like a old Southern secret. Don't acknowledge it. And kind of similar with the match with Alcoholics Anonymous is, I think they say the first step in addressing the problem is recognizing we have a problem. And so I again just want to reiterate our appreciation that we having this forum today, and we really push full speed ahead by putting this correct context. The Cointelpro, you know, it impacts us so many ways that even the trickle down impact is that everything from how the music we listen to, how we depict it in the media, to even what some people refer to as black on black crime. It's said directly and indirectly, covertly and overtly, don't get involved in struggle. I spoke at a school on the southeast side of Chicago. In fact, the name of the school is Winnie Mandela some years back. And I had some issue with a young brother who went to the school but did not know who Winnie Mandela was. And after I went through details about it, and it's, you know, I talked, and then this young man was about 14, 15 years old, with tears in his eyes. He said, "They kill people like you." You know, in layman's terms, this is a young man who had not been in law school, didn't know anything about, you know, the counterinsurgency, so on and so forth. And many people say that the reason that the police are killing disproportionately the Black communities is because we don't know the law. I beg to differ. The fact is that we do know the law. And so we do know that we are, like, just for our skin, just who we are, we're contraband. And that is, again, it's something that we really see the time to put in the correct context. And there's been a war waged on us under the auspices of a war on drugs, a war on guns, a war on gangs, which all these different contradictions seem to stay, but we're disappearing. And when these, similar to like even when the Cointelpro papers were released or revealed, what happened to other communities, people acknowledged it. It's kind of like comedic genius Richard Pryor, who was also impacted by the Black Panther Party, how he has said that many times people from the white community can ride through the Black community and see Black people with dope needles in their arms and dope residue around their nostrils, and they say it's a shame. When they come home and their son or daughter comes on the front porch with a can of Budweiser beer, they say, "Oh my God, it's an epidemic." And the deal is this I think they said Nazi Germany, if they come for us today, they'll be for you tomorrow. This is seen as the norm in our community, to the point that, you know, even myself, when I was a political prisoner, there were prisoners who would say, you know, blatantly, "We would love to support what you're doing, Chairman Fred, but we don't want no heat. They say we don't want no smoke." And I wish we can talk about this in an abstract, nostalgic type of way, how bad things used to be. The fact that Chairman Fred's tombstone, he's buried in Haynesville, Louisiana, is still shot annually by law enforcement. The fact that we still have the Mumia Abu Jamal, Sunday out at Coles, Rochelle, and Cuban Keys, and countless of others still held in prison. The fact that Jerry Odinga Dunnigan has just been released after 45 years, who was directly impacted by actions of William O'Neill, one of the infamous agent provocateurs. It's proof, not proof in the pudding, but proof in the people, the fact that this is ongoing. And again, it impacts every quote unquote decision that we make, because we say non-independent people do not make independent decisions. And that's my December the 4th, 1969, my birth certificate almost became my death certificate. My prenatal care, as opposed to a doctor's stethoscope, was Chicago Police Department's revolver being pressed on my mother's pregnant belly. That was the first piece of steel I came into contact with. Deborah Johnson was my first cellmate. In fact, I have a jail photo right behind me. And that was my first contact with the American judicial system, my first contact with Cointelpro. And it's to the point that, you know, throughout my life, it's intertwined. And again, in our everyday, I'm not gonna say everyday life, but our everyday existence. As Marvin Gaye said, this ain't living. So this is a primary contradiction that has to be addressed. I know there's so many, especially in this time right now, you know, the coronavirus, there are so many issues, but in fact, we say the coronavirus really is capitalism on steroids. So it's more intensified to what we're going through on a day-to-day basis. And some organizations take the position that if we simply get together, pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, we'll be all right. That negates the fact that there's a war being waged on us. That negates the fact that there's a counterinsurgency. Many people say the Black Panther Party just fell apart because of gender contradictions or rivalries. And our response is, don't other organizations have that? The reality is that the Cointelpro targeted the Black Panther Party, set out to wipe it out. And and the deal is they were unsuccessful ideologically. I mean by that is the people still have a love and respect for the Black Panther Party, and that Cointelpro still is attacking it. The fact that I'm in a home right now in which Chairman Fred Hampton grew up in. I'm across the street from the elementary school he attended. It's not by coincidence that those children at school did not know who he was. They were, so and I'm gonna close with this. A man about 50 years old that stays in Maywood. He was at the movie watching Judas and Black Messiah with his parents. He was saying what's going to happen in the movie. And his father asked him, how do you know this? How do you know what's going to happen? His response was, I talked to his son, I talked to his widow. And he asked his father, why didn't I know? Why didn't you tell me about this? And with tears in his eyes, 50 years old, this man told me, his father told him, son, we just wanted peace. I was told by elected officials present day in Maywood that December the 5th, the day after Chairman Fred, Defense Secretary Mark Clark was assassinated, law enforcement came through Maywood, pulled all the young men out of their homes, in front of their wives, in front of their mothers, and told them there would never be another Fred Hampton in here. And this is part of the ongoing breaking process, similar to what we've seen during the era of chattel slavery. When a pregnant woman ran away from the plantation, she was just not murdered. She was brought back in front of the masses of people. Her pregnant stomach was cut open. The fetus was stomped to death. This sent a message of terror that terrified the masses for generations to come. So the Cointelpro is impacting the minds and hearts of people that are physically not here. And we are fighting for the living. We are fighting for the unborn, the living, and the dead. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your giving us your testimony and your work. Congressman Lee, you're recognized to introduce Ms. Huggins and Mr. Seale after that.
Sure, thank you very much. And let me just say once again, thank you to all of our witnesses today for your testimony, which really are very profound testimonies, which speak the truth, which is long overdue on Cointelpro and what the tragic results have been on your families and the country. But you're still fighting for real systemic change in this country. So thank you so much. And I'm really pleased today to be able to introduce a friend also, but also a former colleague and comrade, Ms. Ericka Huggins, who is, I would say, a human rights leader, an activist, an educator, and of course, former member of the Black Panther Party. Ericka served as the director of the Oakland Community School, which was a project that I worked with her on to help establish that on International Boulevard in East Oakland. Also, Ericka, I remember, didn't you write a book of poems? She's a poet and understood how important the spirit was in the midst of this revolutionary work. And so she kept all of those in the party and around her as a community worker, really on point and stabilized and helped with our understanding of what was going on and gave us the strength to keep fighting. Also, she was the first woman and first African-American woman to be appointed to Alameda County Board of Education. She's an educator personified and has always understood the issues around Black and brown children being disproportionately suspended and expelled from school, and why a culturally relevant education was essential for academic success. And I remember, Ms. Huggins, the Oakland Community School, how music and art and all of the curriculum that you developed was so critical in the success of the young people who have gone on to do great things as a result of your leadership. Also, let me just say one thing about the women in the Black Panther Party, because Ms. Huggins exemplifies the strength of the women and the leadership of the women in the Black Panther Party, who I had the privilege to work with on so many projects and so many efforts. And to think that Ms. Huggins and the women and the men of the Black Panther Party who were just trying to make the communities better and make the police accountable and make this country live up to its creed of liberty and justice for all, to think that they were targeted and harassed and many killed and assaulted and lives destroyed is just mind-boggling to me. So I'm glad to see you, Ms. Huggins, still standing and still leading and still a constituent in Oakland, California. So thank you again and welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Congressman Barbara. And thank you to everybody. Thank you, Fred Jr. And my heart is with you. Thank you, and Akua, as a mother, Um, I'm sending you so much love. And thank you, Congressman Rush and Congressman. Um, I am. I want to say all of the Congress people who have had anything to do with this is why I hesitated. And thank you, Congressperson Cohen. Um, I want to say hello to Bobby Seale and Barbara. That the book is called Insights and Poems, and I co-authored it with Huey Newton in 1974. So thank you for allowing me to speak today. This has been a mixture of emotions for me because I have to reach back and pull forward the past that lives with me daily. And so, about the FBI counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, it's had a profound impact on my life, the lives of my family members, many of whom are present today, my dear friends, and all of the communities that I call home. Today, I'll focus on one traumatic event that continues to reverberate in a multi-generational way. By the way, I was raised in Washington, D.C. And in 1963, at the age of 15, I attended the March on Washington. And from that day, I knew I wanted to be a part of making change. And I made a vow to serve people for the rest of my life. So I, I was very, very aware that this would not be easy, this serving people. In 1967 at Lincoln University, a historical Black university, I met John Jerome Huggins Jr. And together we decided to leave school and we drove across the country to California to join the Black Panther Party. We both wanted to be a part of a movement uplifting communities of color. We were Black, but we held the whole globe of communities of color in our hearts. The party had been founded in 1966, and what began as a community patrol organized in response to the police abuse of power against Black and Brown communities, it grew into a nationwide community set of programs. And they've been mentioned already by many others this day. The Free Breakfast for Children program, the free health clinics, the Oakland Community School and other educational programs, adult literacy, to name a few. There were 65 community survival programs. John and I arrived in Southern California in late 1967 and joined the party. Then John was 22, I was 19. As we began working in the community, we immediately discovered that party members were routinely followed, harassed, even killed by the police. Attending funerals became almost routine in Los Angeles. Our phones were tapped, our houses were under surveillance, our offices were watched daily. There were informants planted in our midst, men and women. We knew this was not solely the work of the LAPD. Something larger was at play, but the name of COINTELPRO had not reached our ears. But we knew that there were government entities like the newly formed paramilitary SWAT team that would not hesitate to kill us. By mid-1968, John and I were pregnant with our first child, and we embraced our party work even more fully. We were intent on creating a better world for our unborn child. And in late December, our daughter Mai was born. We were overjoyed. And then 3 weeks later, on the morning of January 17, John smiled at the baby and I, said goodbye, and walked out of the door. That day, John was attending a meeting of Black students at UCLA, where he was a student in their high potential. After the meeting, John and Apprentice Bunchy Carter, leader of the Southern California chapter of the party, were murdered on the UCLA campus. While the shooter was said to be a member of another organization, This episode was a culmination of what had been an intentional and relentless FBI plan to artificially create and foment conflict. We knew it. Only years later would I learn the full extent of Cointelpro involvement to neutralize human beings who are Black. Instead of police showing up at my door that day, hat in hand, to say, "We are so sorry for your loss," they came in great numbers to arrest us, surrounding the house, forcing the door open and standing guns drawn at the bottom of the stairs. I knew what I needed to do. I ran to the bedroom and wrapped my baby in a coat, and I rolled her gently under a bed. As I looked into her eyes, I thought, maybe I might die. She may be fatherless and motherless then, but she will be alive. I heard the police officer at the bottom of the steps shout out, "Come down with your hands up." I moved to the top of the stairs so I could see his eyes. There was something sane there, something humane. I spoke out, "I have a baby here with me." It seemed he was willing to protect us. So I ran back to the bedroom and gathered my daughter. I knew she would be safe. Later, as I waited at the 77th Street Police Precinct station, 2 men arrived that I thought I knew. I almost called out to them until I saw them slap hands with one of the detectives, or maybe an FBI agent. This was larger than the LAPD. Holding my baby daughter, I noticed on the precinct wall a felt scoreboard with white letters proclaiming "Cops 11, Panther 0." And I wondered if John and Bunchy were already reflected in that body count. Years later, I would be contacted by a former FBI agent who asked to meet with me to apologize for the FBI involvement in the events that led to John and Bunchy's death on that day, January 17th, 1969. I wasn't confused about what happened then. I'm not confused now. A government agency supported by taxpayers' dollars helped murder these 2 brilliant, respected, and beloved men. They are sons, brothers, husbands, friends, fathers. John and Bunchy were destined to be great leaders. They would have become wonderful grandfathers. I have long wondered when the right time would be to tell this story to both my grandsons. And today is that day. My oldest grandson is listening to this testimony as I speak. 50 years later, I'd like to believe that things have changed. However, these same forces are still at play, working to vilify, spread disinformation, and destroy the efforts of young people like we were then, whose only goal is to help create a more just and equitable world. The fact that a simple statement affirming that Black lives have value, Black lives matter, can be distorted and equated with terrorism is a symptom of our social disease. Fred Hampton's life matters. Bunchy Carter's life matters. John Huggins' life matters. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you very much for your testimony today and your story about your husband who was tragically a victim of this program as well. And as I understand it, the police tried to paint the murderers as corruptly. They tried to plant evidence and give out to show, to take the proof away from them. So not only they do illegal activities and coverage of the Black Panthers and the murdering, but then in the cover up. So it was a dreadful thing. It's just dreadful. Bobby Rush, you want to introduce us to Bobby Seale?
Not Bobby. Rush.
I'm going to introduce him.
Oh, Barbara's going to do that. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Let me just say thank you, Ericka, so much for that very powerful testimony. And I know how you're feeling, but I know also you have a lot of hope because of what you have been through, because you see the future for our children. Let me just take a moment before I introduce Mr. Seale to mention one person who passed away in 2011, Geronimo Jijaga Pratt, as we know, Geronimo. And if anyone wants to see a factual story about how the FBI operated during Cointelpro, read the story of Geronimo Jijaga Pratt, okay? I was in the California legislature during that time, worked with Johnny Cochran on his case to help him get out of jail, unjustly incarcerated for 27 years. I was a character witness at several of his trials. But if you want to see how the FBI worked, and it's a matter of public record, how the informant created such confusion. His name was Julius Butler, and how this led to this 27 years of unjust incarceration. I would urge everyone to read that story because that's just one of many, and how they work, how they operate, and what they do to destroy people, families, and community, and the organizations, and then suffer years of incarceration, which should never have happened. So please read his case as an example of what we're talking about today. And so now, Mr. Bobby Seale, Chairman Bobby Seale, political activist, author, co-founder of the Black Panther Party. I've had the chance to work and know Mr. Seale since the late 60s, early 70s. Worked on him as a community worker, but also in so many capacities with the Black Panther Party, as I mentioned earlier, his fundraising coordinator for his mayoral campaign in 1973. And I just have to say, Mr. Seale, and to all of those listening, his campaign led Oakland, and it changed the political landscape of the city of Oakland and paved the way for Oakland's first African-American mayor, Mayor Lionel Wilson. I remember attending many political education classes that Mr. Seale ran, sometimes at the church. It was at St. Augustine's Church, where we fed children. But I also remember his lessons about, and this was about civic engagement. It was about political organizing. It was about making democracy real. And he was teaching this way back in the 60s and 70s. To people in our community so that they would understand how to engage in terms of their democratic rights. And for that and many other good work that was taking place through the Black Panther Party and Chairman Seale, they were targeted for COINTELPRO operations, which was, again, sinister and anti-American. So Bobby, I want to thank you for being here with us today. I recognize you now for your opening statement. And I just want to say thank you, to Ms. Huggins, to all of you today for really staying the course and for paving the way, because many of you led the way for so much of what is happening today in our communities, where we will not go back and only move forward. And Mr. Seale, you're one of those who charted the course for Black elected officials in our country. So thank you again.
Thank you. What was it, 1960? I moved back to from Los Angeles to Oakland because of a steel strike. I was a metal worker in a lot of places, a few places in Los Angeles. And in effect, what happened here? Getting back there, I became interested in the protests of people going on, Martin Luther King and others. I did meet Huey Newton in '62, spring, February, somewhere at Merritt College. Myself and Virtual Morale met him. Virtual was a personal friend of mine, you know, before Huey was. And I guess what happened is that, how we put this, I walked across the street. Donald Warden was doing a street corner rally across the street from Merritt College. And I saw this guy, William Brumfield, and walked up to him. I knew him. He was Steve Brumfield, my friend's older brother. I said, what is this Afro-American stuff? Some kind of communist stuff or something? This is what I blurted out because I had no politics at that time. And he says, no, Bobby. I said, Afro, what are you talking about? And then he blurted back to me. He says, who are the Sioux? I said, the Sioux, their name is not the Sioux. I said, they're Lakota. Me and your brother told you that years ago when we was 15 and 16 years old. He said, well, we're not Negroes, Bobby, William Brumfield said. We're not Negroes. We, you know, and then we went on. And so he made sense when I says, in the Sioux, the word Sioux is a French word. It means cutthroat, and that is not the real true nature of the Native Americans. Their true name is the Lakota, and so on. That is what kicked things off a little bit. And then there was a rally, I guess some couple of months later. Virtual Morale and I was out there, and somebody was on a platform of a truck speaking and says, you are treated as second-class citizens. And I shouted out to this young white radical, whoever he was, I'm no second-class citizen, I'm a first-class citizen, I said. And then Virgil said, Bobby, he says, you're treated as a second. I said, oh, that's right. Anyway, my point is, that was the first introduction. Now, right at this time, I had landed a hell of a job after the steel strike. I landed this job maybe a year or so before that at Kaiser Aerospace and Electronics, one of the big time companies that built war materials for World War II, et cetera, along with a lot of other companies. And I wound up in the engineering department on the Gemini missile program. And I was really proud of this job, and I worked there. But I lived across. We moved across the street from Merritt College, and I once I mastered the Magnum Flux non-destructive testing program for engine frames for the Gemini missile program, I shifted to the night shift to run that department. And I enrolled in Merritt College that September as an engineering design major, but I only took 6 credit hours the first semester and then 9 credit hours the next semester. As an engineering design major, that's what I was at. At the same time, civil rights was being going on, and I started picking up books and things like this here, you know, Robert Williams and others in Monroe, North Carolina, and that kind of stuff. And then I just got totally interested in the history of Black Americans, what have you. And this is what kicked it off. To make it short, I worked at Gemini Missile Program for almost 4 years. Before I left that job, a year before I left that job, Dr. Martin Luther King came to Oakland, California to speak at the Oakland Auditorium. That Oakland Auditorium would all seats filled at 6,750. That was an auditorium that I packed and filled maybe 10, 15 times in the years that we organized in Oakland. And Dr. King, I had no organization, what have you. I did know some guys out in the community, but I went to hear him speak because, you know, I'd given up going to the holy roly churches where hell and damnation was the, you know, as a kid. I got tired of the devil sticking me with a pitchfork. Anyway, my point is that Dr. King was speaking. I'm one individual, there's 6,750 people in there. I have no real organization, what have you. And Martin Luther King went on to talk about how we were last hired and first fired, what have you, et cetera. And then he got to a point in his speech, and I like to imitate him because I am an actor and I am a jazz drummer and other stuff on the other side of my life. But Dr. Martin Luther King says, right here in the San Francisco, Oakland Bay Area, Langendorf Bread Company and Kilpatrick's Bread Company will not hire any people of color. He says, and all across America, Wonder Bread Company will not hire any people of color. I say we're gonna have to boycott them, Martin Luther King said. And we wanna boycott them so consistently and so profoundly, we wanna make Wonder Bread wonder where the money went. And me and the whole audience hit the floor in a standing, applauding. I mean, I was totally inspired by one each Dr. Martin Luther King in that claim. He was not preaching hell and damnation and all that stuff. He was talking about constitutional, democratic, civil human rights. This is the way I love to phrase it from those times. So that was that. Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam. And when he did, he apologized to all the Black civil rights organizations for all the critical statements that he had made against the civil rights group. That's one thing Martin Luther King did I really checked out. At any rate, I met Huey in '62 spring somewhere at a street corner rally. And William Brumfield, whoever, William Brumfield, Huey he had another name for him, I forget, but it was his writer's name. He had written an article in the Negro Digest. Johnson Publication Company attempted to do Negro Digest. Anyway, my point is, these people was having a street corner rally, what have you, et cetera. I was already reading various articles and stuff and about our history, et cetera. And, you know, I met Huey and what have you, et cetera. And that was that. Me and Virtual Morale went on and went somewhere else. Anyway, as time rolled by, Malcolm X was murdered. When Malcolm X was murdered, I went over to Huey's place and I said, hey man, you want to work with me? I'm getting ready to organize people around because they killed Malcolm X. And Huey says, no, I'm in law school now and it's hard to organize people and I'm not interested, what have you, et cetera. And I said, well, later, said I might have been. And anyway, Virtual Morale and I organized a rally at Merritt College, the first Black student rally. Merritt College had about 5,000 student population. Half of them were African-American people of color, okay? And the Black people had no student organization on the campus. And we created the first one, Seoul Student Advisory Council. I named it. And Virtual, who had 12 credit hours, I only had 6 or 9 credit hours. You had to have 12 full load credit hours to start a student organization. So Virtual signed it and started Seoul Student Advisory Council. I did the name. And with that, what happens is that we had a problem because students, Black students had not been politicized or what have you. We pulled this big rally off and we packed a little auditorium of 700 seats. Marvin Jackman, whoever did a half an hour, 1-act play. Sisters did some African dances and stuff like this. And I was master of ceremonies. for the whole 3-hour program. And at the end of that program, but that program was all about the fact that about the fact that 29% of all the people dying in Vietnam was Black Americans. And I had been in the military service, but me and Virgil are rallying to say we're not going to let ourselves be drafted to fight in the war in Vietnam, because this country is not yet recognizing our constitutional, democratic, civil, human rights. And we put that rally together. And this was some months after I talked to Huey. And Richard Aoki, our Japanese friend, who we went to high school with Huey, et cetera, had told Huey that Bobby was having a rally, and Huey came at the tail end of the rally, and it blew his mind that me and Virgil had organized some 700 brothers and sisters in there, et cetera. And I recited this poem I got from Ronald Stone, out of the Liberator magazine, one of the more than 27 periodicals that I subscribed to that back in those days. I had by this time digested Black Reconstruction by W. Du Bois, Dr. Herbert Apthacker's documentation of all the wars we had fought in this country from its very beginning, and so much other material. I mean, everything you could think of. This was all before the party ever started. At any rate, that rally brought the house down. Huey had came in at the tail end of it and saw the people, blew his mind. You organize all these people? I said, yeah, man. I said, what? So me and Virgil, Richard Aoki, and others who says, what are you guys doing now? I said, Virgil, how many people signed up for the new organization, Soul Students Advisory Council? He says, over 250. He got a list there. And I said, what are you going? I said, we're going to my house across the street. What are you going to do over there? This is Huey. He's all interested now. And I said, I got barbecue over there. I'm a barbecue cook too. I'm a jazz drummer and a whole lot of things. My point is, I took most of the people, they told them that when they signed up that Bobby Seale had some food across the street at his house, so with the backyard and everything. And Huey, of course, came along. And Huey was always hungry.
Mr. Seale, we're running low on time. If you
I'm
summarize your
sorry.
statement.
Wait a minute. Go ahead.
It's all very interesting, but we've got
Well, anyway, the
witnesses.
counterintelligence program set up an operation against me, all my party members, the whole murder of Bunchy Carter and John Huggins, et cetera, was strictly Senate investigation hearings a few years after the party was over, literally identified these infiltrators, et cetera, and people, and what the FBI did. Trying to get my documentary made 12, 13 years ago, we found the Nixon on the phone, and the Watergate tapes had been made public. Nixon on the phone at telling J. Edgar Hoover, when are you going to get rid of these damn Black Panthers from me? And J. Edgar Hoover is answering, well, sir, we've been working on that, what have you, et cetera. So I don't like to stop it at J. Edgar Hoover. This was Nixon. And then John Mitchell, after Nixon has been sworn in, is up on national television. By the end of this 1969 year, we'll be rid of these damn Black Panthers. We haven't even been charged with nothing yet. I'm telling you, this is the operation that went down. I went through 2 major trials in jail while I was doing it. I was in jail for 2 years. I won both trials in the final analysis, you know what I mean, et cetera. That trial that Ericka Huggins and I was in, et cetera. We won that. I deliberately testified in the first trial, and all I wanted to get get out before they picked my jury for our trial was that I never went into this place where they say George Sams was there. George Sams was literally a provocateur agent put in to the party via Stokely Carmichael, and I didn't find that out. I found out he was that, but when did he really? When did the FBI really put him in? And Dr. Small told me 15, 16 years ago, he says, Bobby, George Sams was down in Lowndes County. He says, I was down there. He said, and that was back in 67. I said, 67? Eldridge Cleaver had called me up one day. He said, Chairman, he says, what? And we had a small organization at this time. And this is 67. And he says, what? He says, they're going to draft Stokely. And Stokely says he's not going to be allowed to be drafted. And so Eldridge wanted to write a draft notice and say, the Black Panther Party, our new organization, small as it was going to draft Stokely Carmichael. So Eldridge typed up the thing. We called a press conference on the steps of the police department in San Francisco. I read this draft notice, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then 2 days later, Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, said he accepted the draft notice of the Black Panther Party, et cetera. And that's when J. Edgar Hoover and them put George Sams on Stokely Carmichael, you know, and even in Fred Hampton's murder, I forget the brother's name. He was put on Fred Hampton, you know, his murder. I'm just saying the whole.
Mr. Seale, we're gonna have to come back to you, but we'd like to do that if you stay with us. Thank you so much for your testimony and all your work. Appreciate you very much. Our next witness is thank you, sir, Miss Betty Metzger. Maybe mispronouncing that. I'm sorry. She's an investigative reporter, author, photographer, producer, media critic, and educator. In March of '71, as a Washington Post reporter, she was one of 5 recipients, 3 journalists, 2 members of Congress, of copies of FBI files stolen by a group of anonymous individuals called the Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI. She was the only recipient to make the files public. The documents revealed unprecedented FBI spying on students, academics, anti-war and civil rights activists, African-American individuals, organizations, and other Americans. One of the stolen files revealed the existence of one of the FBI's deepest secrets, a series of programs, most of them illegal, known as Cointelpro. Ms. Metzger went on to teach journalism practice and ethics, an extensive public academic career. She's a founding member of the Investigative Reporters and Editors and has served on the board of the Center for Investigative Reporting. She's authored 4 books, including The Burglary, The Discovery of J. Edgar Hoover's Secret FBI, which details the theft of the Cointelpro files from the FBI's office in Medea, Pennsylvania. Ms. Metzger, thank you for joining with us. I look very much forward to your letting us know what you found in those files, what the illegalities of Cointelpro that were revealed, and how we can go about correcting some of those abuses.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to be here today. It's a very humbling experience to be among all of you. I'm especially moved by the stories of those of you who have profoundly deep injury, I guess is one way to say it, as a result of the crimes of Cointelpro. And one of the things that I can't help thinking about are all of the people who were so deeply affected by it and may not even know to this day what damaged their lives. And I know that there is still a concern among some of you about those people. I'm going to describe the complicated path of how Cointelpro went from being J. Edgar Hoover's most closely guarded secret to being revealed to the public. As you probably realize in your own lives, there were terrible things happened, and for a long time we had no name for what they actually were. We know COINTELPRO, we know the name COINTELPRO, and actually much of what we learned about J. Edgar Hoover's half-century as FBI director, in large part because of a plan conceived in the fall of 1970 by William Davidon. William Davidon was a physics professor at Haverford College. He also was a devoted civil rights activist and a devoted anti-war activist. And by the fall of 1970, Bill had reached a conclusion that those organizations, those movements were increasingly filled with spies, and he assumed FBI spies. And he felt that there must be a government program, official government program to suppress dissent. And he felt that if there was a government plan to suppress dissent, that amounted to a crime against democracy, and that it was a crime that had to be stopped. And unlike other peoples who worked with him and said, "Oh, that's too big, that's something that you can't do anything about," he thought that it was just too big not to be solved, and accepted responsibility for trying to find a way to solve it. And that describes really the birth of what was known as the Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI. It's a group of 8 people, including Bill Davidon, who agreed with him that if the FBI was suppressing dissent, that it was so important that they were willing to risk decades of their freedom, even their lives, to find out, to get the evidence that they could present to the public that this was happening. 2 of them were a couple, John and Bonnie Raines, and they feared that they might be arrested, convicted, and imprisoned. And they feared that so much that they made arrangements for their 3 children to be raised by relatives. The revelation of the existence of COINTELPRO crossed the first hurdle when these amateur burglars succeeded against all odds in breaking into an FBI office on the night of March 8th, 1971, 50 years ago this spring. And with the broadcast sounds of the Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier fight helping provide some sound support so that they hoped people wouldn't hear their breaking in. They removed every file in that FBI office, and then 2 weeks later started anonymously distributing copies in a series of mailings that took place over the next 2 months. They had no idea that their act of resistance would do far more, reveal far more than the fact that, yes, J. Edgar Hoover was officially suppressing dissent. In the first files that they sent out, there was evidence of how the FBI was conducting massive surveillance of Black communities throughout the country. So massive that when it was described, what came to mind for many people, including some members of Congress, was Stasi, the secret police that had penetrated the entire society of East Germany. The program was described in these files that I received in great detail. And that is every agent in the country, every FBI agent in the country was required to hire at least one informant to spy on Black people and to continuously open files on Black people without regard for suspicion of crime or even violent behavior. And this was true except in Washington, D.C., where every FBI agent was required to hire 6 FBI informants to surveil Black people and develop files continuously. And within the FBI, one of the files indicated this project was so important that any agent who failed to comply with its requirements was charged with failure to perform. I'm still sort of stunned by just thinking of the size of all of this. I mean, just think of it. It really was amounted to the entire FBI being mobilized. Every FBI agent was required to develop all of these cases on a constant, ongoing basis to get as many Black people into the files as possible. It wasn't until 3 years after the release of those first files by the burglars that it became evident that actually the most important file that they had removed from that FBI office was a mere routing slip. The term COINTELPRO was written in big block letters in the upper right corner of that file set. When most of us who received it, the term meant nothing. We wrote about what it was attached to. But a year later, another journalist, Carl Stern of NBC, saw that file, and he decided to find out what that term meant. And he asked the FBI, and they repeatedly refused to tell him what it meant. And they also refused to give him files that would explain what the term meant and what the project was. So Carl became the first person to sue the FBI to get access to files. He asked for the founding documents, the documents written by J. Edgar Hoover. A federal judge ordered the FBI to release the files to Stern. And because the officials refused to do so, and the FBI refused to do so, and then they asked the acting Attorney General, Robert Bork, to appeal the decision. And in a shocking rebuke to the FBI, Bork decided that he would not do the appeal, and instead he gave the files to Stern. And that was in December 1973. The public learned then, for the first time, that the FBI conducted highly secret operations designed to, in Hoover's words, expose, disrupt, and otherwise neutralize people and organizations. The FBI furiously fought the release then of files that would describe specific COINTEL operations. But they had to, by the end of 1974, and certainly at the time of the Church Committee hearings in 1975. And when those files came out, they really were a shock to the American public. They were probably less a shock to people such as some of you who were just sort of intuitively knew that such things were happening. But they considered, they caused a very strong public reaction. And also for the first time among some members of Congress who were calling for J. Edgar Hoover early on to be investigated, something that did not happen until 1975. But when I say that the files were beyond belief, they showed what I consider actions that ranged from crude to cruel to brutal to murderous, something again that you're all aware of. The informers, for instance, the informers gave activists oranges that had been injected with heavy laxatives. Prostitutes known to have venereal disease were hired to seduce people regarded as enemies of the Bureau. And one particularly despicable practice, and Representative Lee, this speaks to what you mentioned, is what Geronimo Pratt experienced. It really was quite amazing, and I know that there probably are many examples of this. Geronimo Pratt was a much decorated Vietnam veteran and a Black Panther in Los Angeles. And he was the victim of one of these operations. He was imprisoned, as you said, for 27 years, 8 of them in solitary confinement. He claimed during all of that time that he was innocent. And he finally, in 1997, got his day in court. And a judge in Orange County ruled that Pratt had been convicted on the basis of false testimony given against him at trial by an FBI informer trained to give such testimony. And as the files that had been released at media, likewise, when the COINTELPRO files became public, it was evident that any American could become a target of Hoover's secret operations, but merely expressing a liberal idea could justify opening a file on someone. But these files, like the earlier files, also revealed that unlike white people, Black people did not need to express a liberal or subversive opinion in order to attract Hoover's attention. Just being Black meant that you were considered dangerous in Hoover's FBI. It should be in the files, should be monitored, and often much worse. Hoover died in 1972 without ever being questioned by Congress about his operations. Other FBI agents did testify under oath in the Church Committee hearings, and what they said said a great deal about Hoover's FBI. Gregory Moore, I'm sure a familiar name to all of you associated with what happened to Mr. Hampton. Gregory Moore was the head of the Bureau's Racial Intelligence section. And when he was asked by the Senate committee, did anybody during the execution of Cointelpro operations, did anybody inside the FBI discuss the constitutionality or the legality restrictions? And Gregory Moore answered, no, we never gave it a thought. And then there was another witness, very important. One of you mentioned William Sullivan, one of the highest officials in Hoover's FBI for many years, the person responsible for the efforts of the long campaign to destroy Martin Luther King, including the effort to try to get him to commit suicide. He told the Senate committee, never once did I hear anybody, including myself, raise the question, is this course of action which we have agreed upon lawful? Is it legal? Is it ethical or moral? We never gave any thought to this line of reasoning because we were just naturally pragmatic. The one thing we were concerned about, will this course of action work? Will it get us what we want? Will we reach the objective we desire to reach? Another impact of the FBI's cruel programs was that one of the most powerful impacts was the destruction of the FBI's core mission, law enforcement. There's a historian, Athan Theo Harris, who has spent many years studying FBI documents. And after doing so, he concluded that no crime was ever prevented by any of these actions that were conducted by the FBI. He said, I know of no case where there was a benefit to society. The FBI gathered no information that had anything to do with finding out, say, Joe Smith is going to blow up the Capitol, something that supposedly could be prevented. It was harass and destroy rather than what we understood their mission was, which was investigate, prosecute, convict. The substantial damage to law enforcement by Hoover's FBI and the severe damage also to the, for instance, narrowing acceptable political discourse left significant scars, ones that are pretty obvious still today. But clearly the most shameful legacy of Hoover's FBI was the damage it did to Black Americans. The FBI's treatment of Black people undoubtedly delayed, when you consider the enormous volume of it, undoubtedly delayed for decades progress in the quest since slavery to claim basic rights. The FBI operations directed against Black people during Hoover's time were such that it was as though they had flowed directly from enforcement practices used in post-Reconstruction years in the South. There are many of these crimes, as you have mentioned, and they are a great tragedy that we certainly hope we can prevent from happening again. There was a time when the most powerful law enforcement agency used the tools of espionage, usually reserved for foreign enemies, but used them against Americans. I'll just
Ms. Metzger, we Please close. Thank you.
Pardon?
Yeah, we want to hear your close. Thank you.
Just briefly, I just want to close with some insights from FAO Fritz Schwartz, the chief counsel for the Church Committee. He interviewed the witnesses who appeared for all of the intelligence agencies that were being investigated. And he reached the conclusion that the FBI abuses were by far the most dangerous that were committed by any of the intelligence agencies. But one other insight that he had that I think is important for all of you in Congress as you move forward on this issue is reflecting on why it was possible for these crimes against Americans to continue, even thrive in Hoover's years. Fritz concluded that it was because Hoover had the assumption of having everlasting secrecy, that he was able to make that assumption throughout his career because no one, including Congress, questioned him. Thank you.
You're welcome, Ms. Metzger, and thank you for your great journalism, and we'll get back to you with some questions. Thank you so much. Our next witness is Mr. Michael German, a fellow with the Brennan Center for Justice, Liberty, and National Security to ensure the U.S. government respects human rights and fundamental freedoms in conducting the fight against terrorism. Former special agent in the FBI, work focuses on law enforcement, intelligence oversight, and reform. He joined the Brennan Center in 2014. He was an FBI special agent for 16 years, specializing in domestic terrorism and covert operations. He left the FBI in 2004 after reporting continuing deficiencies in the counterterrorism operations to Congress. He serves as an adjunct professor at the National Defense University and as a policy counsel for national security at the ACLU from 2006 to 2014. He's authored 2 books, Disrupt, Discredit, and Divide, How the New FBI Damages Democracy, published in 2019, and Thinking Like a Terrorist, Insights of a Former FBI Undercover Agent, published in 2007. A graduate of Wake Forest and Northwestern University School of Law. Mr. German, thank you so much. You're recognized.
Thank you for inviting me to join this remarkable panel and to discuss the harms that result when a powerful law enforcement agency operates without effective constraints or oversight and feels empowered to disrupt, discredit, and neutralize people and organizations based on racial, religious, and political bias rather than evidence of wrongdoing. I joined the FBI in 1988, more than a decade after the Church Committee exposed the Cointelpro abuses and Congress and the Justice Department implemented reforms intended to prevent their reoccurrence. I felt fortunate to be joining the FBI after these hard lessons had been learned, but they were short-lived. The reforms were designed to require the FBI to focus its investigative powers where objective facts indicated that illicit activity was likely to take place, so that evidence of wrongdoing drove investigations rather than bias. While Bureau officials later complained these were too restrictive, I found the standard requiring a reasonable indication of criminal activity to initiate investigations provided plenty of authority to conduct proactive terrorism investigations like my successful undercover operations against violent white supremacist groups and far-right militia groups in the 1990s. While the requirement to document criminal predicates before initiating investigations was intended to protect the innocent from unnecessary scrutiny, it was also an effective way for me to keep my operations properly focused where the best evidence pointed. Unfortunately, after 9/11, the Justice Department instead loosened the guidelines, significantly lowering the evidentiary standards for conducting intrusive investigations in 2002 and then again in 2008. Congress assisted in the destruction of the post-Church Committee reforms by passing the Patriot Act and amending the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act to allow broad electronic surveillance and secret intelligence collection against Americans not suspected of any wrongdoing. Removing requirements for reasonable criminal predicates did not make the FBI more effective in identifying threats. It only filled FBI databases with irrelevant data and opened the door to another era of abusive investigations targeting communities based on race, ethnicity, religion, and political dissent. I became alarmed in the months after 9/11 when language from the Cointelpro era crept back into routine usage at the FBI. The FBI resurrected a discredited theory of terrorist radicalization that J. Edgar Hoover had used to target immigrants and labor organizers in the early 1900s and civil rights leaders and anti-war activists in the 1960s. The FBI began producing anti-Arab and anti-Muslim counterterrorism training materials and disseminating them to other agencies. The FBI formally adopted a disruption strategy, authorizing agents to take aggressive actions like pretextual arrests and deportations against individuals that they suspected but could not prove were involved in terrorism. So it was not long after the FBI replaced the COINTELPRO targets, Black nationalists and the New Left, with updated labels like Black identity extremists, American Muslim extremists, anarchist extremists, and Antifa. In 2005, the FBI publicly declared eco-terrorism the #1 domestic terrorist threat, despite the fact that environmental activists had committed no fatal attacks in the US. In 2000, the FBI initiated a racial and ethnic mapping program. Peace groups, environmental activists, Black Lives Matter leaders, and Standing Rock water protectors have all reported FBI surveillance and repeated harassment at their homes and workplaces by Joint Terrorism Task Force agents. Meanwhile, the FBI cannot tell you how many people white supremacists killed last year because they do not track the violence that these violent criminals perpetrate. The lessons learned from COINTELPRO and the evidence of new abuses demand that Congress act to protect the American public. Restoring reasonable criminal predicates and conducting more aggressive oversight are essential steps to ensure that the FBI resources focus on real threats and aren't driven by bias. Thanks for inviting me to participate today.
Thank you, Mr. German, for your work and for your continued work with the Brennan Center and trying to bring reform to the FBI. And I'll have some questions for you in just a minute. Our final witness is Ms. Nkechi Taifa, president of the Taifa group. She's a senior fellow at Columbia University Center for Justice who convenes the Justice Roundtable and Advocacy Coalition advancing progressive justice system transformation. She's worked as a staff attorney and policy counsel for a number of advocacy organizations, founding director of the Howard University School of Law Equal Justice Program, and a private practitioner representing adult and juvenile clients in DC and federal courts. She's testified before U.S. Congress, Sentencing Commission, DC City Council, et cetera, and the American Commission on Human Rights and the U.S. Helsinki Commission, of which I'm a member, so that needs to be cited. She served as appointed commissioner of the chair of the DC Commission on Human Rights, award-winning attorney. She's the author of a new memoir, Black Power, Black Lawyer, My Audacious Quest for Justice. Ms. Taifa, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
COINTEL's got blacks in hell. They open up our mail, tap our phones and kick our bones and railroad us to jail. FBI went so low they invented COINTELPRO to stop the rising fire of a black messiah who could unify and electrify black people to revolutionize. Co is for counter, which means to use against. Intel is for intelligence. Pro is for program. They thought it was the perfect solution. Counterintelligence program to crush the revolution. So goes an excerpt from a poem I wrote in 1975 as a college student, while chairperson of the National Committee to Free the RNA-11, a group whose organizers and leader, Imari Obadelli, were direct targets of the FBI's COINTELPRO. During the course of that case, I had the inglorious opportunity to scrutinize thousands of pages of heavily redacted documents, starkly revealing the Bureau's goals to disrupt and destroy Black movements, stop their leaders from gaining respectability, and appalling strategies to stop the long-range growth of Black organizations, especially amongst the youth. How does this all relate to today? In a number of ways. First, there are victims of the COINTELPRO era who still languish in prison. Elderly people facing life-threatening conditions such as Dr. Mutulu Shakur, Russell Maroon Schultz, Veronica Bowers, Imam Jamil Alameen, all fighting cancer. 84-year-old Sundiata Kohli suffering from early stage dementia. Mumia Abu Jamal recovering from heart surgery. Nearly all also trying to recover from COVID-19 symptoms. While these elders deteriorate behind bars, not one governmental official ever served a day in prison for COINTELPRO crimes, despite the Senate Church Committee's findings that the COINTELPRO constituted an illegal and unconstitutional abuse of power by the FBI. As the country comes to a historic reckoning on race, let us remember the fourth provision of the Japanese American Reparations Bill, a pardon to all those who resisted detention, camp, internment. We must keep that precedent in mind. Pardons for former members of the Black Panther Party and other groups who still languish in US prisons from the Cointelpro era, as well as others who are exiled. Second, it is crucial to understand that Black resistors are still being monitored, surveilled, and subjected to unwarranted harassment and abuse through COINTELPRO's successor, overreaching governmental programs. COINTELPRO did not end. It simply shift-shaped, morphed into a Black identity extremist program, an Operation Relentless Pursuit program, and now a nefarious assault on constitutionally protected protests, which, if history is any guide, will be disproportionately used against demonstrators and communities of color. State legislatures are steamrolling a new wave of anti-protest legislation, jeopardizing the constitutional right of free speech and peaceful assembly. 34 states have introduced 85 anti-protest bills, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of last summer's protests were peaceful, in stark contrast to the January 6th white supremacist terrorist insurrection of the US Capitol. Many of these measures increase penalties for demonstrators while providing legal protection for counter-protest measures. Although some point to the deadly insurrection at the Capitol as grounds to enact harsher penalties for protesters, what these laws actually do is put a target on the back of Black demonstrators in an attempt to silence movements for justice and accountability, and as a ploy to put more protesters in prison, a tactic direct from the COINTELPRO playbook. This Congress must not be duped by the false narrative that governmental restraint leading up to the January 6th was in some way an outgrowth of restrictions from the FBI's past domestic spying abuses. It was not. And finally, rather than rushing to embrace these thinly veiled laws, it is my hope that this Congress will learn from the past. Past Congressman Bobby Rush's bill requiring the government to open up the FBI files and have a full, unredacted accounting of COINTELPRO's constitutional abuses. And I strongly submit that we must free the victims who are still incarcerated, languishing behind bars from that era. Thank you, and thank you for all those who gave their personal stories and testimonies.
You're very welcome, and I really appreciate your intro. Your poem was beautiful. That was very cool. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to start with a few questions, and I'm going to ask Ms. Medgars. First of all, in the files that were stolen and revealed from the FBI, how much of COINTELPRO's files were part of that? How many of what percentage of COINTELPRO files were released to the public, and how much has still not been released?
Well, none of the files that the burglars released were labeled COINTELPRO, except for that routing slip, which was a cover of an article that the FBI wanted. It was an article about how college administrators should take out after protesters and students and professors who were protesting the war. And so that fit into the program, and that's why that was it. None of the other files in the media files were labeled COINTELPRO, but some of them were COINTELPRO-like. And that's one thing I would like to mention about the legislation, Representative Rush, that you have proposed and that the rest of you, I understand, support. That's a wonderful idea to bring the COINTELPRO files together, finally, unredacted and available for the public. But one thing that your question reminds me of is that there was so much else that I hope it's possible to reconsider the scope of what would be in such a collection for the public. There are many instances of COINTELPRO-like operations that would not be found if you asked the FBI for COINTELPRO files. But then there are so many other things that would be valuable to have in such a collection. For instance, the racial intelligence section of the FBI and ghetto files, two categories that inevitably would be of great value for us to have access to. I would hope that you could look at this with an expansion of what could be in such a collection. There also are the two Stasi-like things that the FBI did. I mentioned the incredible effort for get as many files on as many Black Americans as possible. People immediately considered that to be a Stasi-like thing. There was another project that the historian I mentioned found, and this never got much attention because it was written about in an academic journal and not picked up. But the FBI at one time, beginning in 1940 and lasting until 1966, had a formal agreement with the American Legion that 100,000 members of the American Legion were informal informers for the FBI and constantly filing reports on their neighbors. Is anybody, there has to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of records about those files that were really very Stasi-like when you consider what the outreach of the American Legion.
Ms. Metzger, I'm sure that Congressman Rush and others and myself will want to talk to you about the idea of expanding that bill. It's a great idea. Mr. German, in your experience at the FBI, did you come across any particular files similar to this or programs similar to this where they went specifically after people based on race or gender or political identification?
I didn't personally come across them until 2004, or actually 2002, when I started raising concerns about the post 9/11 changes internally to the FBI, but certainly it happened. Trevor Griffey points out in the chat that the FBI engaged in an abusive investigation in the 1980s against Central American solidarity groups. Similarly, the FBI engaged in abusive investigations of Palestinian groups in the 80s and 90s, long before 9/11. So it's important to recognize that those strong guidelines that came out after the Church Committee investigation are essential, but aren't sufficient, right? You need strong guidelines plus effective congressional oversight and effective public oversight. I mean, it's astonishing that we don't know this history at the FBI, when in a democracy, we should know what the FBI is doing today with its authorities that continue to impact Black Americans who are part of the Black Lives Matter movement or other political activists.
Well, we'll get, and the Judiciary Committee has not had much luck with getting Mr. Barr to testify before us, but I'm sure Mayor Garland will. And I imagine we'll have some, we've had good luck with the FBI director. We'll go into all of this. You know, there's so much we've seen. COINTELPRO also had wars really in Hoover against gay individuals. And there was a documentary David Korn and Michael Isikoff did about what they did to out people in the federal government and what they harassed people. I mean, they went so far as to harass and listen in to Ernest Hemingway's conversations and to bug his phone. People thought he was losing it when he said the FBI was doing this, and he had gotten paranoid to the point of mental illness, which he was suffering from depression. But it turned out they were bugging his phone and reading his mail, and led to his suicide. Very much so, it could have contributed to his suicide. But almost any cause that we've seen with progress, and they had this group they called the New Left program. Anything with the New Left, whether it's environmental, whether it's women's rights, whether it was Black activism and Black rights, Black people be considered human beings and get the rights they didn't get after the Civil War, nor through Reconstruction, or still haven't gotten in completely. These were opposed by the FBI through government funds, and it's just astonishing what went on. Miss Huggins, your husband, you told us about the man that killed him was never found, was he?
No, he was never found. As a matter of fact, one of my friends who was there on the UCLA campus that day, January 17th, 1969, said that she saw a man run out with a gun. And as he did, the police, as if they'd been trained to do so, all turned their heads, and the man got away, never to be found. And there were men who were arrested and convicted of conspiring to kill John and Bungie, but they were not charged with murder. So this one man has not been found.
But did people in the Black Panther Party, of course, he was from another party, wasn't he from the U.S. group?
He was said to be a member of the US organization, but I want everyone to know that one of the things that Cointelpro did was to foment dissent and really tear the bonds between community organizations through infiltration. At one point in Los Angeles, it seemed as if there were 1 out of every 3 or 4 members of the party, and later I found out this was also true for many other organizations, was an informant. Usually a Black informant, of course, paid to do so.
But it's amazing what they did, and it's interesting that that individual got away. We know what the FBI did to try to encourage dissent between the Black Panther Party and the other party, and that they tried to bring this hostility about. And it was 1969 when your husband was killed. It was later 69 December when Fred Hampton was killed. It's
right.
kind of hard to fathom that Dr. King was killed in April of 68. And I got out my book, which I know Hellhound on His Trail. It basically is a book, great book by Hampton Sides about James Earl Ray, and saying basically he did it, but it's almost hard to believe that there wasn't some involvement. At the time, the FBI director in Memphis, the police director, police chief, he was called a chief then, was a former FBI agent. And they had Ernest Withers, who was a photographer, as an informant. They had others. There was a legend that he had a policeman that was stationed at the fire department near the Lorraine Motel, was an agent. So, I mean, there's so much that's just, it's unfathomable, because who hated King? He wanted Dr. King to commit suicide and the illegal activities. But I'm sorry about your husband and all that. Barbara Lee, do you have any questions?
Who you asking?
Barbara, are you with us?
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah.
Got you, Barbara. You're on.
Okay, yeah, very quickly. First, I'd like to ask Mr. Seale this question to briefly answer. And I want to set the stage just by saying, continuing with the discussion about how infiltrators were FBI agents to destroy the Black Panther Party and to pit people against each other. Upon my return, and Ms. Huggins, you may remember this, Mr. Seale, you probably remember this. Upon my return from the 1972 convention in Miami, Florida, I attended, I believe it was a meeting to organize for one of the rallies. And I was confronted by several of the Black Panther Party members, one in particular, who later, when I got my file, found out that this was an agent provocateur, who told me never, ever come to a Black Panther Party meeting again, told me that I was, you don't even want to know what they told me. They accused me of being an agent provocateur because I had gotten involved with the Shirley Chisholm campaign with the Panther Party and asked for voter registration drives. A whole history of and sequence of events took place that put my life in jeopardy after that meeting and the convention in 72. And it took Huey Newton to unravel this, which he did, and found out that there were other things going on at that point. So Mr. Seale, and once I got my file, I know exactly who it was and what the deal was, but that could have, put a lot of people in danger who went to the convention, including myself, and I was ostracized for a heck of a long time because of that. So Mr. Seale, just briefly, give us a couple of examples of how the FBI created dissent within the Black Panther Party. I've given you one example that I knew personally because it involved me, but I know you have several examples that you could just summarize so people can see other ways that they created havoc and death and destruction.
Well, when I went through some of my Cointelpro, what you call it, when you get your information, I forget these terms.
Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah, Freedom of Information Act. Later, I went to, what happened was one time there was, the FBI literally had somebody print in the Oakland Tribune that Bobby Seale was fornicating with some 8, 9, 10 females. And they listed Madeline, a young child, who followed her brother into the party. And they listed Marcia, and Marcia was there. Now, I had met with these parents when their kids came down, and they were young like that. I told them to come and let them know that they're working here, et cetera, and this kind of stuff. And we try to keep them safe and what have you. And I don't allow them to carry guns, selling papers and all this kind of stuff, what have you, et cetera. What happens is that that document, that statement. So, but before that was printed, Madeline come up and attempted to hit on me. And I got angry at her. And so I told somebody to call her mother down here. And I got her mother there and said, your child here, what is she, 14, 15? It says hitting on me, etc. Now, I didn't know about this. Anyway, that was a situation that I said, I don't want her around this party anymore, etc. In effect, so when they printed this 2 months later, the FBI printed this later that Bobby Seale is fornicating with these kids, which was not true. My point is, later in life, when we got other Freedom of Information Act documents, FBI report in one of those documents says the tactic to discredit Seale of fornicating with other women seems not to be working, was the report. That these are the kind of things that, but there was much more stuff. I mean, George Sams was a plant. I didn't find out he was a plant. I kicked George out of the Black Panther Party in March of that year because somebody called me over. I had never met George Sams. He was supposedly to be a bodyguard for Stokely Carmichael, who come into the party, etc. So the field marshals and the others there says he jumped on this brother. And this is in March of that year. He jumped on this brother here and said he was a police and that's why he was beating him up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I looked at it, I said, well, he's Stokely's bodyguard. I had never met or never seen the guy because, I had hundreds of party members around me all the time. My point is this, and so I said, well, asked him who he thought he was. I work with Stokely Carmichael and blah. I says, oh man. So I said, we're kicking him out of the party. And he had 2 pistols, guns stuck in his belt. And we took his guns. And then told him, I said, you're out of the party. Get out of here. You can't. I said, get this man out of here, man, before I have to knock him in the goddamn head. I mean, I was pissed at that stuff, And so they got rid of him. Now, that was in March.
Can you wrap up in the next 10 seconds? Because I have to go to Ms. Huggins and we're past time.
Okay, I'll wrap it up. Is that what I want to do is I need to sit with people, and the sister who just gave that whole report on the Senate investigation hearing, I want to sit and talk with her. I mean, because I have so much information and so much stuff, so much crap that went down, around me, and I didn't even realize it or know. that this was a police infiltration to years later. Right
Sure.
on down to the fact, when I went into jail in Connecticut, 2,000 miles away from Oakland, they in a month and a half, they put me on isolation because I organized the prisoners to protest something. But my point is dang.
Mr.
I just can't explain it now.
We're gonna follow up, Mr. Seale, with our chairman to help drill
Okay.
down on some
Yeah,
of the issues that we raised.
I need to do that because
Well,
it's so complex, but I
Yeah,
caused
we're-
a lot of things. I caused an investigation against that system in Connecticut. And I took the jail commissioners while I was in jail to the federal court for violating the Constitution, the rights, et cetera, of me and other prisoners. Ericka was there. She was in that trial.
Okay. And Mr. Seale, we're gonna have to go to Ms. Huggins now, and we're gonna
Okay.
come back and follow up with you and drill down so we can, this is
Sure.
an important first step. Ms. Huggins, let me just ask you very quickly, in terms of your life's trajectory, Cointelpro today, 2021, the movement for Black lives, how do you see the lessons learned and what we need to know moving forward from your experience?
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Bobby. The thing to know is that you called it Cointelpro 2. The names change, but the structure, the scaffolding of the FBI has not. My dear friends who are connected in some way with Black Lives Matter, which wasn't at all an organization like the Black Panther Party, but a set of networks, call me often, not to complain, but to say, how did you do it? How do you remain hopeful? We are devastated by the amount of surveillance, the stalking, the misrepresentation of what we're doing. You would think that we are criminals because we're being criminalized. So I think that as a congressional team goes forward, that all the areas, as Betty said, of the FBI need to be looked at. You know, what does it mean that you have something called racialized intelligence or racial intelligence? I'm saying, Barbara, that racism is institutionalized. We all know that now. We use that term more commonly now. However, we need to do, as they say, a deep dive into the FBI if the structures would be changed so that this can never, shine a light on it so it can never, ever happen again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. And lessons learned, this is the beginning.
Steve, am I up, Steve?
Bobby Rush, the man who beat.
I want to thank each and every one of our participants today for your extraordinary testimony and for your outstanding work. The record must reflect that on December the 5th, 1969, my apartment was raided, and I had gone underground, and had I been in that apartment, I would have been murdered myself, because at 5 a.m. The very next morning after they had murdered Fred, they came to my apartment where my wife and 2 children were living with me. And again, I had gone underground. But I want to just ask Fred Hampton Jr. Fred, you are a current activist. You're on the streets, you're out here in the community, you're on the front lines currently. And you've heard some of the strategies and tactics of the FBI that they've conducted prior to the murder of your father, and subsequent to the murder of your father. Do you see any of these same tactics currently today being utilized by the FBI in terms of the black, not only the Black Lives Movement, but the movement that you're directly involved in?
Yes, Congressman. In fact, we have a term. We have a term which we say from Cointelpro to now Intelpro. It would be ideal to look at the tactics that were employed in the Black Power movement in the 1960s in nostalgic, abstract sort of way. But I suppose the system, this government's position is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just as of the present day, agent provocateurs, informants, not only have been sent to disrupt the campaign. We have a major campaign we've been organized to say the Hampton House, but just our day-to-day work in regards to freeing political prisoners. And one of the major disadvantage that was doing in the 60s as well as now, a non-acknowledged war. In other words, other communities have the quote unquote, I guess, advantage and disadvantage for terms such as propaganda bombs, terms such as political prisoners to be acknowledged. In our situation here in our community, it's been euphanized as a war on gangs, a war on drugs, what have you. And this is a system, many people, in fact, our comments, many people should go back and file, for the taxes or whatever, that they work for the government, not even knowledgeable of it. And Chairman Fred would say that some of these cats are crazy, some of them, or just actual agent provocateurs. And this is a system that, as we've seen in the case of George Sam, so many that exploits contradictions such as mental health illness, jealousies, complexes, you name it. And it would be ideal that if it was if people can choose to be targeted. I think this Metzger pointed out that there's a machine that's set up that different FBI officials were designated to go out into the community, and just simply for being Black. There's no neutral ground, so not so the attacks are not just limited to our organizers, the Black Panther Party Cubs, and our fight for the self-determination, but the community in general. That that has resulted in the city of Chicago now infamously referred to as Chirac. And again, there's no neutral ground. And this is something that has to be addressed. I wish there was an option to say, well, some people say, I don't want to be involved in this, but it's a system that, similar to, we say, to be a successful warden, people have to be in prison. To be a successful drug dealer, people have to have habits. The Cointelpro seems to be a necessary ingredient, in order to keep the machine going, of Black, political prisoners being locked up. And the fact is, our blood seems to be the oil for this machine that continues to be going.
Well, thank you. Ericka, when I listened to your detailed testimony around the murder of Bunchy and John, it really became crystal clear that it was a part and parcel of the same boilerplate type operation and that resulted in the murder of Fred. I mean, the names changed, but the playbook remained the same. Can you tell us a little bit more about the FBI's efforts to, as you say, foment the friction between organizations, youth organizations in LA, because they did the same thing in Chicago between the Stones and the Rangers and the Disciples and the Vice Lord. Can you talk more about that?
Yes, and I sent a document to the chief counsel for Congressman Cohen, spelling out the cartoons that the FBI sent between, for instance, the Los Angeles chapter of the Black Panther Party and the US organization in Los Angeles. We inhabited offices in the same building. As a matter of fact, when John and I first got to Los Angeles, we attended a free Huey rally on Huey's birthday in February of '68, and I have a picture of Bunchy Carter and Ronald Everett, Ron Karenga, sitting shoulder to shoulder on the stage because they were spokespersons. There was no animosity there. And then I began to notice when these cartoons came, and it was Bunchy who brought these cartoons to all of us. He shared with us, look at this. You know, we didn't draw this and we didn't send it depicting something awful about the US organization. Remember that we don't go against people in the community. This isn't us, and there's something big going on. And we all became silent because though the cartoons were hilarious and couldn't have been drawn by any person who was Black, it just was very obvious. What we came away with is that we were in serious danger. When Bunchy left us that day, he said, and I'm going to the US organization and I'm going to share with them that we did not do this. And we found out that similarly, cartoons were coming in the other direction. And so on the UCLA campus, this disruption and tension was created, as Fred Jr. described with William O'Neill, and as we know with many informants, that they just went from place to place, creating havoc, often putting young people in danger, and often creating the stage for murder.
Yeah, I experienced something similar in the, I think it was about the spring of 1969. We were at the party headquarters on West Madison. About 10 o'clock that night, we got a call that told us that some of the members of the party had been attacked. They were involved in a shootout in Robbins, Illinois, and they needed help. And so those of us in the office, about 8 or 9 of us, including Fred, we got into, when vehicles were there, we rolled out to Robbins. And as soon as we pulled up to that, it was a tavern. As soon as we pulled up, and we got out there maybe about 11:30. Before we could even get out of the car, we opened the door and all of a sudden shots rang out. And it was a setup. The FBI had called in, it was a setup. And we have, there were notices that were similar veins, letters written that said, you know, they said we won't kill certain members of the Blackstone Rangers. And you can tell that they weren't written by Black people because they were using obvious terms that wasn't within the idiom of the Black community. And one of the strategies, though, that we knew that this was going on. And one of the strategies that we came up with in terms of the leadership was that, and we, in a similar vein, had conversation and built a certain amount of respect and commonality with Jeff Ford, especially the Blackstone Rangers. And we told Jeff, if you hear of any kind of incident where there's an attack, call us and we will do the same. And that, the fact that we had that kind of understanding, stop or curtail the FBI's thrust to foment violence between the Panther Party and the Black Keystone Nation. Mr. German, last year you wrote an article that detailed the legacy of the FBI's operation on Black activists throughout its history. I was really surprised to learn that entertainers such as Billie Holiday was targeted by the FBI and many, many others. But in your article, you also highlight the FBI's recent, I say recent, efforts to suppress Black activists during the Trump administration and after recent killings of Black people at the hands of the police. Now, as a former FBI agent, can you provide further insight into into Cointelpro or Cointelpro's offspring? And as a result of these insights, can you give us some idea of new policies that we can advocate for that would change the culture of the FBI, its relationship to the Black community, and its viewpoints that it stands on, that all or the majority of Black citizens are enemies of this nation, and particularly as a new policy that would change regarding the Black activists, those who are on the streets protesting, redressing our nation. Can you tell us some of your ideas and your thoughts about how we can fight this viciousness of the FBI?
Certainly. Thank you, Representative Rush. And I think it's multifaceted. I mean, one of the things we have to keep in mind is the FBI is still a predominantly white male organization. So the attitudes of white males in this country predominate within this institution that's given so much power. And every law enforcement institution is given tremendous powers in a democracy. And the only way we can limit them is through very strong guidelines that ensure they are focused on their mission of solving crime. Because anytime they're given a broader mission to engage in intelligence collection, and they start to imagine what are the threats on the horizon rather than what is happening in the community today, that's when their bias is so clearly shown. Because as I said, the FBI today doesn't gather information about violent crimes committed by white supremacists, actual crimes committed. They can't tell you how many people die each year because of white supremacist violence, and yet they are engaged in these, what they call proactive investigations against Black activists or against Native American activists up at Standing Rock, or environmental activists or other peace groups that they have infiltrated because they see the potential for the harm that might do down the road is more threatening to them and the institutions they're defending than crime that's actually targeting communities of color. So I think the key is we have to both establish strong guidelines and very much increase the oversight that we're giving them. I mean, it's not just these historical records we can't get. I've talked to many members of Congress who ask for simple data from the FBI and can't get it. The FBI was supposed to have published under the National Defense Authorization Act the number of cases it opens up against in domestic terrorism, how many target Black activists, how many target white supremacists. They were supposed to have produced that information in June. They still have not produced it. So we need to make them accountable to the people, because that, in a democracy, that's who's supposed to control. And until the FBI feels accountable to the people, I think we're going to continue to have these problems throughout history. But I'm happy to work with you on specific reforms.
Thank you. Mr. Maxwell, let me ask you a question. There is undeniably, there exists a a sense of brotherhood between the white superior activists, the insurrectionists that came into the Capitol on April 6th, on January 6th, and the FBI. Do you find, or have you noticed how that sense of brotherhood, that fraternity of ideals and actions and ideology, have you noticed, is that a real threat to American democracy, in your opinion?
I'm sorry, who is that? Is that question?
Ms. Metzger.
Yes.
Ms. Metzger. Can you hear me?
Is she still with us? She may not be with us.
Ms. Metzger. Okay, well, maybe you can take a stab at that, Mr. German.
Yes, it certainly is a problem. I wrote a report last summer called Hidden in Plain Sight: Racism, White Supremacy, and Far-Right Militancy in Law Enforcement. This is a persistent problem that's been there forever. The FBI warned me when I went undercover against white supremacists that we had to be careful about who we shared case information with among our fellow law enforcement officers, because those sympathies were well known. This is a long-standing problem the FBI recognizes, but doesn't have a national strategy to protect the public from these racist officers. And that includes inside federal law enforcement and even the FBI. Unfortunately, there's nobody who is actively pursuing it, looking for those instances where people have relationships with people they shouldn't.
Thank you, Al.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you, Matt?
Thank you, Representative Rush. I want to thank all of my fellow Congress people, but also most importantly, the witnesses. This has been very informative. It gives us much food for thought. We will pursue this and go over and have more in-depth
Can I ask
questions.
a question?
Sure.
Since no question was directed to me, I just want to have 2 minutes. I want people to go to Philly May 15th for Mumia Abu-Jamal to move babies that remains that they're keeping. I want people to go join Malcolm X Day in New York with the December 12th committee, that they're going to be discussing a number of things, and they'll have a forum on Judas and the Black Messiah. I want people to join with the Black Panther Party Cubs, and they're doing a caravan to the gravesite of Chairman Fred Hampton Sr. in Louisiana. I want everybody to Google, Siri, whatever you do, free Michelle St. McGee, free Imam Jamil Al-Amin, formerly known as A-Trap Brown, free Mumia Abu-Jamal, all political prisoners, prisoners of war, and prisoners of conscience alike. Support and maintain the Hampton House, the Black Panther Party Cubs that are headquartered in the Hampton House, the Dr. Huey P. Newton Foundation, Tiny House Warriors against the water lines, and long live the spirit of DMX, Mr. Harold Davis, and Nipsey Hussle. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank all of the witnesses, and we're going to have to adjourn. Everybody, I think Representative Lee's heading to the airport, and I've got another meeting that was a half hour ago. But thank you, everybody. We will pursue this again, and hopefully we'll come together again. We'll pursue justice. With that, this briefing is adjourned.
Power to the people.
Free them all. Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Power to the people. Right on.
We are elders.
Right on.
All power to the
All.
people.
All
Free
power.
them all.
Free them
Let the
all.
people
Free the
sort them
land.
out.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Huggins.
Thank you.